Hey everyone. It's hard to believe we are coming around to the conclusion. We have one more discussion class after this, and then a last sort of just summary review wrap up. But this is the last input lecture that you are going to have this semester, and I hope it'll be a fun one. So let's get going. I want to talk about new peer-to-peer infrastructures and how new technologies can potentially support the evolution of much more specific niches than what we're used to within the built environment. So let's talk about what that means. Okay, so think about how people traditionally moved around the world. In terms of wayfinding, and we talked about this in ARC 371, you would have sort of very clear landmarks, very clear visual signals of what was important, and that would help you to orient yourself. So traditional wayfinding would be very much done in a kind of a top-down manner. You'd have like a big church steeple that would say, this is the center of the city, or a big bank building that would say, this is where you come, or a big plaza. And that's fine, except that we're all different and we might have all different needs that we would like to explore and engage with. But there's something about this way of orienting ourselves in the world that turns everything into sort of what is the average, what's the norm, what's that kind of bell curve distribution of what people want. And we can think about this in terms of hotels, right? So here we have the Holiday Inn, and if you're traveling around, you see a big building and it's a Holiday Inn, and you think, well, I know that brand, and it's a big building and I can see it, so I can orient myself, and it's got sort of signals that tell me that this is what I should be expecting to do. And so then everyone checks into the Holiday Inn, and it's kind of fine for everybody. It's not great. And maybe somewhere nicer, maybe, and there's other sort of norms. I mean, this is a norm at one price point. Maybe there's like 3 normative price points: high end, mid-range, and then Super 8 or Motel 6, which is where I've stayed most of my road trips for most of my life. But there's not a lot of options out there, and if you go into a Motel 6 versus a Super 8, the stuff you're going to get is going to be pretty much standard, right? You can't break too far from the norm. Okay, now think about that in terms of, that's the way we used to orient ourselves in the world. And only the very big players would be able to signal, hey, I'm out here, right? Like this sign over here, that kind of signaling of a presence in the world, that can only be done if you've got enough money to be able to purchase a big billboard. Now imagine if 25 years ago you'd been wanting to stay in a place. So you had just, landed in a city with your backpack, and you'd walk through the train station, and then there'd been a bulletin board. And on the bulletin board, there'd been like a piece of paper, and it says, hey, need a clean, nice place to stay? Cheap rates, 25 bucks a night, call Roger, and a phone number, and you can rip off a piece of paper. Now, how many of you would say, hey, yes, I'm going to call Roger. Sounds great. Awesome. Maybe Roger's even put a picture of the place, and you kind of look at it and it's hard to tell. Not that many photos, one grainy one. I'll compare that to the situation today. How do you travel? If not all of you may travel, so fair enough. Sorry, I apologize. How do many people in the world today travel? Well, effectively, they call Roger. But Roger is a little different now because he's not a piece of paper on a bulletin board. He's on a platform called Airbnb. And Airbnb says, hey, here's what I have on offer. And what I have on offer is not the normative thing. It can be incredibly tailored to your specific niche requirements. And you can go through all kinds of listings and find exactly targeted what you specifically want in your location, at your price point, with your special needs and requirements. And we trust it. We're not going, well, this seems a little bit sketchy. I'm not just going to go stay at some random person's place that I've never heard of. So why do we trust it? What's different about the fact that there's a bulletin board with a piece of paper up in a train station versus going on to Airbnb. So think about that for a second, and we'll get to it. Okay, so niches. If we think about how we move through the city, right, and how we generally orient ourselves, well, there's clear pathways, right? And we walk along the street that seems like, well, this is the street that everyone else is walking along, so I guess this is the street that I walk along. Again, if you just land in a place, you don't know where you're going, you get out of the train station, you look to the left, you look to the right, you use the visual signals. You say, well, to the left, it kind of looks like there's less people walking that way. Up ahead, straight up that street, looks like there's a lot of people. I guess I'll go that way. And you follow what becomes that normative trend. But now it's a little bit different, because maybe the thing that you want to do isn't actually to walk on the street where everyone is walking. Maybe it's that you want the quietest route. Maybe you're very noise sensitive and you want to be on a route that's really quiet. You know that you have to head to a hotel, that it's somewhere, but that route that you want the quietest route. Some of you might want the most beautiful route, that you really just want to look at lovely architecture and you don't care if there's not a lot of people on the streets. You want to walk by all the beautiful buildings. Some of you might want the shadiest walk because it's a really, really hot day and you're aching for shade. And some of you might want the happiest route, which I'm not sure exactly what that means. But Amazon did this. They did sort of a crowdsourced routing for how to get from point A to point B. And they surveyed people to say what's the shortest route, the most beautiful route, the quietest route, and the happiest route. So now instead of having one normative route, we have 4 different kinds of route niches that can serve different needs. And this is a much more individualized way that we can begin to curate our own particular experience of the built environment. So back to why we trust Roger, right? If Roger has got 1,464 5-star reviews, we feel pretty okay about Roger, right? When he was up in the when he was just up in the train station, he had 0 reviews. We had 0 signals as to whether that trajectory of action of going to that particular hotel or Airbnb would be a good idea. When we see a Holiday Inn and it's a really big Holiday Inn and it's got a really big billboard, we think, well, all the other people who went to Holiday Inn before me can't be wrong, so it must be okay. So, you know, we trust that based on their brand. But now, even if you have no brand, we can still have new signals and information resolution through reviews. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's one size fits all, because Roger might be right for you, but not right for me. And so if you're looking for eco-friendly, vegan, I don't know, no clothing required Airbnb, you know, there's probably some little niche of people who are looking for that. And they can find that depending on how many parameters we have, depending on the variety of signals that are being rated. So instead of just rating, yes, thumbs up, boo, thumbs down, we don't know what that thumbs up and thumbs down is for, unless we have separated out the parameters, right? And this is that qualitative stigmergy versus quantitative stigmergy. So the qualitative stigmergy is telling me, oh, there, it's the description is accurate, the communication was great, it was super clean, the location was fantastic, all of those things. And the more specificity we get within that information parameters, the more we can say, well, you know, cleanliness might be really important to you, but I just want it to be cheap. So I just want 5 stars on the cheapness, right? Or quality for money. And cleanliness, meh. Whereas for someone else, they really want that 5-star on cleanliness and they're not going to consider it. So we can begin to tune exactly what we want, really figuring out what niches match with our needs, with our desires in much more specific ways because of this new information revolution, which leads to information resolution. And I call it information revolution. What I'm really talking about is that we have this new infrastructure that is helping guide how we operate in space. And this new infrastructure is information. Information is now cheap. It's everywhere, it's plentiful, and it's very, very fine grained. So you can find those long tail offerings that before disappeared. We couldn't find them, and even if we could find them, we couldn't trust them because we didn't know if they were accurate or not. So what happens then is we get a very different kind of dynamic occurring, and the dynamic that occurs now occurs in the cloud, in the air, in the internet, as opposed to on the ground. Before, we used to attune more to physical signals, and they would guide us. But now, more and more, we're tuning to virtual signals that are emerging. And when I say virtual this time, I'm not talking about the virtual that we were talking about philosophically. I'm just talking about not physical, but in the web in some way. So imagine these are all the Airbnbs, right, in a given city. And as people start using them, certain Airbnbs start emerging as being more popular, right? Probably for different reasons. Over time, we begin to have more definition of where these are. But you can imagine then that as people start to say, oh, this one's successful, I'll go there. And then you get another positive review and another positive review and another positive review. Then eventually, due to small sort of initial changes in who got reviewed well early on, you're going to have that rich get richer phenomena. And you are going to have an emergence of clusters of different kinds of fit Airbnbs. And these might be fit for different reasons. The only reason I chose different colors, and I could have chosen a multiplicity of colors here, is the thought that, well, maybe these are really fit because of value for money, and maybe these are really fit because of location, right? They could be fit for different reasons, meeting different niches, but they are fit. And then we could have these, different colors for that whole long tail. But the idea being that eventually we'll start to go from this sort of random, all Airbnbs are created equal, to this bottom-up emergence of fit Airbnbs. And they then become attractors because now you're the top hit in terms of best Airbnbs to be located in. And what will also happen, we would expect, is that 20% of the Airbnbs will be responsible for 80% of all bookings, right? And then 80% of the Airbnbs will have a small number of bookings, but they will still receive 20%, the remaining 20%. So they could still be fit, but just for much smaller groupings of people, right? Okay. So P2P, peer-to-peer feedback and enslavement. I just want to talk a little bit about this. Peer-to-peer positive feedback tends to amplify random behaviors, which we saw in that last slide. Emergent behaviors are not predictable. They are based upon the independent agent actions, and effective patterns are reinforced as new agents become enslaved in pre-existing patterns. So again, once you see one place that's gotten a review of 2,000 reviews, your chances of going to that place rather than choosing an Airbnb that has 0 reviews is reduced. So it's much harder for people who enter late to get those first reviews. You have to then have a much lower price. You have to incentivize people in other ways. You have to have great pictures on your website that encourage people. Or there could be, if other niches are filled up, then people will begin to explore some of those more peripheral niches. So that said, casts are dynamic systems open to energy perturbations. There are always options for new pathways to be explored and reinforced despite enslavement. So even though some Airbnbs may be very popular, there could be a shift in the fitness landscape. Maybe now people don't care about price, they just care about how socially isolated can you be in this Airbnb. That's an alteration of the fitness landscape, a shift in the system. So some Airbnbs that maybe weren't very fit before are becoming more fit. I think that now they say that sales prices in suburban homes have gone up quite a lot since COVID started, because people are moving away from the inner cities, and especially if they're not going into their workplace, then that proximity to work doesn't matter anymore. So people are more concerned about social distancing. That's a shift in the fitness landscape. Emergent patterns are contingent. That is, they are patterns that display according to a particular historical path, but could equally have manifested differently. And again, I mean, it's a pity, but that poor guy who has an equally good Airbnb to the guy next door, but the guy next door just happens to get randomly a couple of really good reviews at the offset, and the first guy just randomly gets some really irritated customer who just loves to complain about everything, and they leave a really bad review, and then it takes a really long time for him to recover from that bad review, and by that time his neighbor, you get the idea, right? It's contingent, it's historical, it's path dependent. And then there's this idea of growth and preferential attachment, where success is reinforced over time and you begin to have these network effects. And so here, we can talk about it in terms of the nodes, but we can also talk about it in terms of pathways and linkages within a system. Okay, so I'm interested in these digital, physical, human feedback loops. And this was actually from a project done a few years ago by a student of mine, where we're sort of talking about negotiating space through the internet, where a human might sort of have a particular need and like put that out in an app as, okay, this is what I'm looking for, and then there could be a digital response. And so maybe you sort of say, I need a space to be able to host a meeting with 10 people, and then a restaurant says, we're willing to meet that need for you. We can meet that need. And then if someone says, okay, great, yeah, I'll come to you, then you could begin to have these reinforcing attractors where there's a coevolution between spaces that say they're offering something but no one's taking it in that digital interface, and businesses that say, well, they're offering something and people are picking up on it. But this could lead to new kinds of ways in which we use space, where it's less controlled by like the visual cues. And, we talked in 371 about wayfinding and about Kevin Lynch. And what I'm really interested in is these feedback loops that aren't happening on the ground, but are happening through digital mediation, where you can get these new basins of attraction that you would never otherwise find. So let me think of an example of that. Like, a pop-up party, right, that is occurring someplace that you would normally never be able to source unless you were insider, but through social media that you could source that, and then that could actually become a virtual landmark in space as opposed to a physical landmark in space. So there's kind of this blurring right now between these virtual domains and these physical domains, and what is actually steering you more. What I'm noticing now is when I'm traveling is that, people often aren't looking at the sites, they're looking at their phones, right? And sort of navigating around through their phones and understanding that they might have a very specific thing that they want to do in Paris. So rather than the Eiffel Tower being the thing, well, that's the thing everybody does. They go to the Eiffel Tower. But, when I was there, my daughter wanted to go to a very specific perfume shop to get a very specific perfume that she was interested in. And normally we could never have found that. But because of the internet, we were able to kind of tune what her landmarks were for her specifically, rather than the idea of a top-down tuning. By the way, if my daughter's watching this video, which she may well, sorry, we never did find the perfume shop, but we did go to the top of the Eiffel Tower. So I'm very normative. Okay, so all this kind of ties in, these ideas tie in with ideas around the self-organizing access economy. And I want to talk about this a little bit and then show you a few examples. So one of the things I said is that information now is everywhere. It's really, really easy to get information. And in a way, people can then exchange things in a much more simple way, or get access to things in a much more simplified way. So I can get access to a spare room in your house that you aren't using right now, and it's like, great, you need it, I've got it. We can organize this together. We don't need a lot of top-down organization in order for this to happen. We might just need a platform for it to occur, an information platform to exchange. But once that is in place, we can kind of figure out, well, I only need this, I only need my spare room 10% of the time. The other 90% of the time, it can be opened up on the access economy. And this allows us to distribute resources in very different ways from how we used to distribute resources, because If information is costly, if it's hard to coordinate things, then even though I know I only use my ride-on mower, I don't know, once a week, I don't want to have to coordinate when I'm using it with when my neighbor might be able to use it. Like, that's too much of a hassle. The other thing I definitely don't want to organize is having to sort of manage interaction with problems. So if there's a third party that manages that, it makes things much simpler. So given this new sort of capacity of us to be able to share things based on when we need it, how often we need it, etc., how important is ownership, owning things, versus being able to have on-demand access to things? And how could we extract added value from existing infrastructural objects like lawnmowers or boats or office spaces if we were no longer feeling that ownership was important, but instead that simply access was important? What are new ways that we form trust networks? So previously we needed the Holiday Inn to signal I'm a safe place to stay. Now we have other ways. It's this bottom-up sort of crowd knowledge that allows us to trust. What are new ways that information infrastructures help organize content that was previously impossible to source? So really, this is what I'm talking about with, you might have an extra room, I might need an extra room, but before we couldn't coordinate that need and that offer. And how have logistics of association been simplified? Okay, so this piece about versus communes. What I mean here is that people have talked about sharing resources before and putting resources into a common pool, but generally that involves a commune. And the access economy is not a commune, because a commune implies that people all have to come together and negotiate, be in agreement about things, whereas often an access economy can be managed by a third party. So it's a much more neutral. I don't have to actually engage with the person who I am renting a room from on Airbnb in any more than just the most basic way. I don't have to negotiate with them. I don't have to solve problems with them. Whereas when we're dealing with communal sharing of resources, there's a lot more friction. There's a lot more negotiations. And when I say frictions, I just mean that, when people are trying to organize things collectively, some people seem to take more than others. It's difficult to resolve conflicts. It requires a lot of cognitive load to manage those shared resources. And then often people just say, you know what, it's just easier if I go it alone. So some examples that I want to talk about is cars. So cars are really used only about 8% of the time. 90% of the time, they are just a resource sitting there, sitting around doing nothing. So is there different ways in which we can think about transport in more effective ways, where a car is a particular niche? How can that niche be utilized, distributed, and optimized in new ways? The next one I want to talk about is roving rooms, which is a project that was done last year. I think some of you are actually in this course in ARC 402. Thanks, guys. We use 20% of our living space 80% of the time. So what could we do with that other 80% of our living space that we only use very, very occasionally? How can we leverage that long tail where it's not just sitting empty and it could actually be used productively? And the last one is a project called Pluggable, done by a master's student of mine, Rennie Bavaria. And it really asks the question, does the environment that we wish to live in, is that always a constant? Do we have to buy one house or one apartment and live there 100% of the time until we move next? But I might have needs on a Tuesday for what my house should be from what my needs are on a Friday or a Saturday, and a different need in the summer from the winter, but I have to choose identical needs for 365 days a year. So is there a way to make that less rigid, less about a normative, well, I'll be satisfied with this kind of compromise scenario, and instead really work to figure out, is there a way to think about housing in a more flexible manner? Could we distribute our housing expense costs to more accurately reflect changing desires rather than equalize these to suit the norm? And what I mean by this is, distributing our housing expense costs. Like, if I want a pool table in my living room, that means that I probably can't get a hot tub in my backyard, right? It's a trade-off. I've got to choose some things, even though maybe I only want to use the pool table 50% of the time, and if I had a hot tub, I would want to use that the other 50% of the time. But I can't navigate that difference, right? Ideally, what I want is for someone else to be using the pool table 50% of the time when it's sitting not being used, and then let me use their hot tub the 50% of the time that I want a hot tub and that they're not using their hot tub, right? But this is what I mean about that, you know, that sounds impossible given the coordination costs of doing this. But maybe if we think about it now with new technologies, there are ways in which these systems could self-organize. So these are the examples that I want to walk through, and I'm going to go to a couple of videos to do this. Oh, and I should mention the Project Pluggable was, we published this one. So if you're interested, I can let people have the link. Just message me on WebEx saying that you're interested. So I'm going to pause and go to a new share, and then you'll see a video. Okay, here we go.
The Mobility Hub is the embodied expression of new mobility. In the urban environment, the hub serves as a link among different types of public transport with vehicles for spontaneous use. Here you can get information about various mobility options and also register. The sharing zones are an essential element of the Mobility Hub. They are spread over the city area and provide a wide range of vehicles for hire. At one tariff, you are entitled to unlimited use of the circulating vehicles so that the borrowing comes with minimum effort. The Energy Car Park uses renewable energy sources like solar and wind power. In 2030, urban traffic will be dominated by various modes of electrically driven transport. With advancing battery technology, the problem of range restriction for electric vehicles will be solved. In 2013, the Alfredstraße still has 4 lanes for motorized traffic alone. Yet, in 2030, the transformation to the cycle superhighway will be completed. Due to its optimized traffic regulations for cyclists, the city center can be reached quickly. In order to promote electric mobility, 1 lane was exclusively reserved for electric cars before the construction of the cycle superhighway. The modal split of the traffic volume will shift significantly. The number of vehicles will decrease to 25,000 daily. Let's take a look at the Steinke family, who in 2030 live in Essen-Rüttenscheid and no longer remember the mobility of the past. 35-year-old mother Tanya works as a senior insurance employee. She compares her options on her smartphone. The subway would be the fastest means of transport today, but Tanya decides on car sharing because she wants to take some documents to the office. Although the drive takes a few more minutes, this is the most convenient option for Tanya today. She walks to the Energy Car Park, borrows a car by using her mobility card, and drives to the office. After she has arrived, she parks the car at the station right next to the office. Shortly before closing time, Tanya quickly checks the current mobility options. In order to avoid rush hour, she uses the subway and gets off at the Mobility Hub. From there, she can walk. Ulf Steinke is 39 years old and works as a graphic design freelancer with flexible time management. After breakfast, he wants to take his daughter to the daycare center, which of course is environmentally friendly too. He uses the local bicycle loan system and borrows one of the convenient cargo bikes. From the daycare center, Ulf bikes to his office. On the way, he stops at the supermarket to buy 2 crates of water for the office. With a cargo bike, he can easily take them there. After use, he parks the bike at the station nearest to the office. This is what urban mobility in the future might look like. The greenhouse gas emissions in the transport sector will be reduced drastically. Due to an intelligent combination of public transport, bicycle, and other options, such as car sharing, mobility in 2030 will not only be environmentally friendly, but also fairer and cheaper for urban residents.
Okay, so you can think about how that car, or that really it's a transport share system, is operating as a complex adaptive system. And also consider how in North America, in terms of degrees of freedom for transport, that we've really limited ourselves in terms of the car somehow being the one-size-fits-all solution in almost all cases. I mean, cities are trying to change and think about that differently, but really there's this idea that the car becomes the mode of transport, whether you're going, you know, a mile or 500 miles. And so there's quite a lot of rigidity in the system. There aren't a lot of degrees of freedom in terms of how movement can occur in the city. In that example, think about what are the agents in the system. And so I will only tell you the wrong answer is people. Or if that is a right answer, it's not a helpful right answer for us, because we can't know how people are going to evolve. But we can think about how, if we position agency in a car, a cargo bike, a train, any of the transport modalities that we have in the system, that is a system with multiple agents in it, which is fine. For your final project, you can think about a system that, rather than dealing with mutations, it's really mutations amongst a grouping of agent options, and that these agent options are then discovering when, where am I fit, and how many of me should be part of that system in order to meet the niche requirements for what I've got on offer. Okay, and then how is that signaled? How would those agents be learning in the system? All right, let's go to the next one.
Allow me to introduce you to the Roving Room. The Roving Room is a modular, transportable space that can travel to your home at your convenience to provide a function that you don't normally need. When you select a Roving Room, you have 2 options. You can either select from pre-made rooms or customize your own rooms. When you select from pre-made rooms, you can sort rooms by category and find both conventional rooms created by our teams to fill basic needs, or customized rooms previously borrowed by other users. These rooms are available to you at a discounted price and faster delivery than customized rooms. Fully customized rooms are also available to suit any potential need. You can choose not only the furniture and appliances of the room, but flooring, paint, and wall customizations. Roving Room walls are available in small sections that allow any room to be exactly what you need, customizable to over 1.8 trillion variations of windows, doors, walls, and openings. Say your grandparents are coming to town and need a place to stay. You can provide them a quality, customized bedroom with a bed, dresser, and plenty of windows with only a few hours advance notice. Roving Rooms can be ordered spontaneously or scheduled well in advance. You can even set up recurrent deliveries, from a yearly tax office ready with reference books to a gym that comes to you at 7 a.m. every day. And since the rooms are portable, you can commute with your Roving Room. Take your home office to work, or take a leisurely breakfast commute downtown with our room's AI drivers. With Roving Rooms, the possibilities for home modification, transportation, and customization are endless. Where will Roving Rooms take you?
So I think that's a delightful project, and there were actually a number of really wonderful videos done for that particular project. I think probably one of the most frustrating things about the final review for that project is one of the crits said, oh, I mean, this would be so costly to do it this way. And I was sort of staying quiet because I don't want to jump in and defend my students when it's the final review period. They've heard enough from me. But my thought is that, well, what's more costly? Having rooms that you build for every house that sit there empty year after year after year and get used a fraction of the time, or creating mobility rooms that can go and be used by many people. When you think that you're buying a house, if you can buy a smaller house and then enter into, you know, a pool of resources that purchases rooms for you on an as needed basis, I don't know if it's necessarily more costly. And I certainly wouldn't dismiss it as being more costly before it was analyzed pretty carefully, but I suspected it would be cheaper, and it would probably, well, it's definitely more ecologically friendly, particularly if the roving rooms move with electric power. Okay, so that's my pitch for those students. Again, some of you are in the course. And then the last one is pluggable, and so let's take a look at that. Okay. Pluggable was done for a Masters of Urban Design studio. And the idea of the project was that, it was sort of inspired by the tiny home movement, the idea that people might want to live in tiny houses, but also that then these tiny homes could be autonomous moving vehicles. So, you know, here's some illustrations of what the home could be. And then the idea that they have these bots that permit them to move, and a LiDAR detector that allows them to navigate. So again, it's a speculative project. This was a project designed for a smart city of the future, looking ahead about maybe 50 years, but using technologies that we can see we are at the kind of the cusp of at the moment. And we're not that far off from this being tangible. The question is, you know, where do the roving rooms go and why do they go there? And this is where we get into self-organizing principles. So the idea is that you could have your roving room and you would be at a given site, and the land upon which your room is sitting is conceptually separated from the ownership of your house. So normally, and again, I said to you, one of the things you can do when you think about the design problem is smash the problem apart. Normally, we link together owning your home and owning the land that it sits on. But do we need to link those things together? Could we smash them apart and pull them apart? So this project does this, and it says, I'm going to own my roving home, but I'm going to lease on an as-needed basis the sites that my home goes to at different times of the year and on different days of the week. And it means that I can wake up in the morning with my home in one location, go to work, during the day, decide on an app where I want to be in the evening, and my roving room will go there my roving room, project's getting mixed up. My pluggable house can navigate itself to its new location, and then I will go home to a new location in the evening. And maybe that sounds, okay, well, that's so disruptive. I want to live in the same spot all the time. But do you really? Do you really want to live in the same spot all the time? Do you want to and you could say, I want to go back to the same location 80% of the time, but 20% of the time, I want to be able to go to a different location, right? We like variety. We don't have the same needs. Some days, and I happen to be living right now in a very nice property. I've got a lovely home at the edge of Ames. We look out into a forest, and I pay with my housing resources, my home resource budget, to own that space 100% of the time. But there's some days when I come home from work really late and all I'm really doing is falling asleep, but I'm still paying for the beautiful view in the forest in the backyard, even if I'm not accessing it, even if I'm not using it. So let's take a look at Matt here. Matt is an artist and Daniela is a writer. They're a married couple, and the house, they 80% of the time within their budget range, they want to be able to live in a niche that offers flowers. So different niches say, oh, I'm offering you a place to live in a flower field with a greenhouse and other outdoor amenities, and you can do gardening here. 15% of the time, they want to allocate their budget to being in a more expensive place that's like a lakefront property where you can go boating, but maybe they only do that for vacations. And 5% of the time, they actually want to be at the edge of the woods and a quiet, calm site just to really chill out and disappear. But that's only an occasional need. Now you see that they're able to allocate their budget differentially for differential needs at differential times, rather than saying there's one normative need 100% of the time. And we can imagine that, okay, well, 80% of the time you are at 20% of the sites, and 20% of the time you're at the other sites that are available to you. Again, how do you access this long tail of stuff that might not be needed all the time, but it's needed sometimes? So let's take a look at how this works. So coordination mechanism, again, in this case, we're using the idea of a cell phone, and very much like Airbnb, where you can see what's on offer, and it might be, oh, like there's a really pretty flower site over here. It's near to the road. Maybe the ones that are inside are a little bit more expensive, and you can decide exactly what site you want to have. This app, the pond site is open right now, and you can see there's a bunch of little lots on the pond site, so you can choose what sites are open. You can find out how much they cost to have for the evening, and then these sites are basically competing for fitness, right? So I could say my strategy as an agent, and so here, think about that these plots, these empty plots, are the agents in the system, and they are trying to be successful plots. An agent might be successful if it can get a really, really expensive, offer expensive amenities and get really high-end customers, but maybe they can only do that 20% of the time, and 80% of the time they're vacant. Another agent at another site might have, be a very cheap site, but not be occupied, but be occupied more often, right? And so everyone is calibrating, again, this idea of John Holland, and thinking about, what are the different payoff strategies? Do you want to go, do you want to be a generalist? Do you want to be a specialist? Do you want to be a specialist at the high end? Do you want to be a specialist at the low end? The pluggable units, they move around, and so they go to different sites, and depending on which niches are occupied, that then sends a signal. So this is the lake site, this is the forest site, this is the flower site. And based on signals of which sites are more popular than others, then gradually these sites can adapt. So maybe the flower site shrinks, or maybe they add a forest area, or maybe you start to get these niches evolving to suit the kinds of needs that people have for usage. And that's how we get sort of emergent sort of configurations. So we have an emergent neighborhood ecosystem where we have different people with different needs, different parameters of what they want, different times of the day, and then different sites that gradually begin to shift and evolve. And if certain kinds of sites are successful, then they might expand. If other sites are less successful, they may contract, exactly like the emergent districts in the Grand Bazaar. So even though this is a very high-tech kind of futuristic project, in effect, it's no different from the dynamics that we spoke about in the Grand Bazaar. So I'd like you to think about those relationships, and how really this is like the leather district, and this is like the carpet district, and all the rest of it. And these are all people who have different needs for what they're consuming, right? And then by decoupling the system from home ownership to land ownership, by pulling that apart, people are actually able to now meet many more of their needs. Now I have a solution where I can have the pool table 50% of the time, and the hot tub the other 50% of the time. I didn't mention that, but the projects all have got, the sites all have got amenities. And so the common amenities are things like pool tables and swimming pools and the rest of it. So people can pick when they want to have more social amenities, when they want to have more private amenities, and then choose where they want to be depending on how much proximity they want to those things or not, how often they want access to those things. And the costs of the sites reflect that, and they also can be adjusted according to demand. Okay, so I just want to leave you off with a little, I'm super excited about all these projects. I think they're really, really interesting. There are some critiques of these. And I think the critiques that are important to think about is, on the one hand, our personal choices. Like, we can, in this context, curate very much our own desires. So our lives can become very, very enriched in a sense. The question then is, do we start to create the same kind of problems that we've seen with the filter bubbles on Facebook, where where we start to pick things that we like, and then we're around other people who like those same things, and then rather than having sort of an intermixing of people, you wind up having kind of these filter bubbles. The other question is, you know, if we're doing stuff this way, are the apps that would be required for this sort of stuff enabling us to find the things we need, or is there risk that we're now being surveilled, that our personal privacy is being compromised in some way? And so people have a lot of concerns about these digital infrastructures. I will say flat out, I tend to have less of those concerns, but it is a major critique of this. The other thing I would say in terms of these personal filter bubbles, and whether you are, you know, creating little exclusive enclaves, currently I think housing creates exclusive enclaves, because if you want to live in a neighborhood, you are buying into a neighborhood where everyone in that neighborhood generally is of the same socioeconomic background as you. So there's like a $500,000 neighborhood and $300,000 neighborhoods and $100,000 neighborhoods, and you are living with people of your own kind. So from my perspective, I think you actually get more social mixing happening in this context, because someone who maybe doesn't have a lot of resources to live in a high-end neighborhood, you know, lakeside, 365 days a year, might have the resources to say, well, you know, if I stay at a cheaper place some days when I, you know, I'm really not using my site, then I can afford to splurge and be in a higher end place, you know, 2 weeks a year. And that's when you would get the mixing of people who normally never mix at all 365 days a year. So even if it's limited mixing, I'm of the opinion that it's still better than nothing. The other critique, because I've talked about this project in a couple of different circumstances, and I've heard is, or people have voiced, is this idea of, well, you know, don't people just want to be stable? And I think my response is, yeah, well, if that's what emerges, that's fine. Like, I would think that over time, people would begin to find preferred sites that they would stay at, and they may prefer them, and then they make really good friends with someone else in that neighborhood, and then they get adjacent sites. Have you ever been in the situation where you get a neighbor that you just can't stand, and it plays music you hate, and you're really happy with the neighborhood, but you just don't like your neighbor? In this context, you could just move to a different site and avoid that neighbor. And if all, you know, if all the sites adjacent to that neighbor wind up being empty, then I guess the whoever is providing that niche has to either lower the price for the surrounding sites, or they have to put additional restrictions on what can happen. But now it's not happening with you in conflict with the neighbor. Again, it's that coordination problem that information technologies are making much simpler to resolve, particularly if you have third-party management. Okay, so I'm not trying to persuade you that this is the right way, but I am trying to demonstrate what some unique complex adaptive systems can look like. And I will see you again shortly. Thank you so much for your attention. I hope you enjoyed this.